Your voice, your opinion, your community. Fact TV, free speech protected.
First, I'd like to extend my grateful thanks to the Rockingham Free Public Library for providing us with this wonderful space. And they have been so willing to work with us. They did all the setup and everything. Second, I'd like to extend thanks to Fact TV. Thank you all for coming and filming and broadcasting this to the whole Bellows Falls area. So hopefully this will get further out as time goes on, which is great. Third, I'd like to thank the Democratic Town Committees of Brookline, Rockingham, and Westminster for sponsoring this event. Our democracy is only strong when voters come out and choose candidates that reflect their values. We in Vermont have some of the strongest voting laws in the nation, and that is really something to be proud of. And fourth, I'd like to thank our three candidates for participating tonight, but also for being willing to step up to represent us in the Vermont State Senate. Being a candidate is not an easy thing, and I applaud you, all three. Thank you very much. And there are two rules for tonight's event. First is that we will be respectful at all times, treat each other totally respectfully. And the second is Laura Sherbaum, who will be our moderator from the Rockingham Town Democratic Committee. Our moderator will be the final decision maker in all matters. So she is in charge. Power. Thank you, Laura, and I'll now turn it over to her.
Wow, thank you again all for being here. Again, my name is Laura Sherbaum. I'm a resident of Rockingham. I'm on the Rockingham Town Committee and also on the Executive Committee of the Windham County Democratic Committee. And we are glad to be here tonight. We will start out with submitted questions from prior to this event that were submitted by email. And then we'll move into audience questions. So the submitted questions will be about 45 minutes, and then audience questions. And then we'll leave some time at the end for some informal interaction with the candidates. So the questions that have been submitted, the candidates have received these questions prior to this event. And we will go in the alphabetical order and rotate for each question. We'll start with the introduction of the candidates, and we'll start with Winche. Could you introduce yourself and tell us, including what you consider your best qualification for serving as a state senator?
Hi everyone, thank you for sharing this space with me. My name is Winche Artu, pronouns he, him, his. So when you ask me what makes me qualified to be able to be your state senator, well, I have 17 years of experience in developing and managing public health programming. And I've done this through a variety of industries: workforce development, youth empowerment, healthcare and hospitals, the performing arts, and government and legislation. In fact, I was on the governor administration's advisory board for the COVID vaccine implementation. And I've been on legislative advisory councils such as the Racial Disparities Advisory Panel, where I helped create the criminal justice data warehouse that is now going to be sitting in the Office of Racial Equity. And I did that along with people from the Vermont Law School, from the Attorney General's Office, and the Department of Corrections, and more. And my proudest achievement in that legislation is that the people that decide if, when, how, and why data is collected, analyzed, and made decisions on are the people whose data it actually belongs to. And for me, this approach to making sure that people most impacted are at the helm of policy making and decision making comes from my own experience. I grew up on Section 8, I grew up on food stamps, I grew up with community programs that taught me how to apply for college, that taught me English. I know how important of the role of government policy in our community is. And I am a qualified candidate for state senate because I know how to facilitate helping you be in that room where it happens. I've done it before, and I'm going to continue to do it because I earnestly believe nothing about us without us is for us. And when I assume that power of state senate, I'm ready to share that power with you. Thank you.
Thank you. Wendy, we'll have you go next.
Great. Is it okay if I stand up just so I can see everybody?
Yes, we'll stand up for the next question.
Okay, great. Hello, everybody. Thank you for being here. I'm Wendy Harrison. I'm a Vermonter by choice. I came here in 2017 with my husband. I'm the mother of 2 grown children who are experiencing much of the same things I experienced at their age, but a lot of very different threats, which inform my thinking. I'm a local government professional. I've been a staff member in local government in Florida, and I'll talk a little bit about my experience in Vermont, which many of you know. And I've also been an elected official previously. I served on a town council in Florida for 8 years and worked with inclusive processes to get good work done there. And I'm very proud of that, and I'd be happy to talk to anybody afterwards if you'd like. My first job in local government in Vermont was here in Bellows Falls and Rockingham, and it was a terrific experience. I worked with the boards and the staff and the residents, and we really got some stuff done, and I treasure that time. We did some work on relationships, which are always important. Government essentially must work for the people, so relationships are key. That was a lot of what we did work on. And we also did work with the police department, which was not in its best shape. And so that work, the results of that work continue. After I left, I worked briefly with NACA, the circuit school, while COVID was still happening. So I learned about the pressures on nonprofit organizations, which are different than the pressures on government because they don't have taxes they can rely on. I then went to the town of Vernon, and I did an intentional interim. I found that I enjoy working with communities for a relatively limited amount of time, and while they're in between managers, discussing and working on issues in the organization, and then going on to the next organization. So I worked with Vernon, and then I worked with Winche. And the reason I wanted to go to Winche primarily was because of the work that they're doing with the New Americans. So what I did there was I helped register New Americans to vote. We came up with completely new processes. We were under attack by folks who did not want that to happen. So I worked with the city clerk to help make our rules as impregnable and our processes such that they would not get a legal review. So what makes me most experienced and most appropriate for the job of state senate is I've seen towns all over Vermont now. I know the structure of towns. I know what towns need. I know what people need, because towns are essentially the government that's closest to the people. So what I want to do in Montpelier is be the representative who looks out for the towns and the people and finds ways for the state to help more directly and to respond to your concerns. So thank you for being here. I appreciate your support.
Great. Thank you. It's good to see all of you, and thank you all for coming out. My name is Nader Hashim. I live in Dummerston with my family. My entire adult life has been dedicated to working in public service right here in Windham County. I previously served about 7.5 years as a Vermont state trooper out of the Brattleboro and then the Westminster Barracks. And even though I've previously served as a state representative, I think that my experiences as a trooper are what provide me with the best quality when it comes to serving in the Senate. And the reason I say that is because throughout those 7.5 years, I spent every shift driving to literally every single town in this county and seeing the real struggles that Vermonters face, whether it's opioid addiction, poverty, domestic abuse, or many other issues that exist out here. And in 2018, I had a change of perspective, and I wanted to run for state representative, and I was able to successfully do so, and I served on the Judiciary Committee, where I had a focus on criminal justice reform, protecting migrant families, and helping the most disenfranchised Vermonters. And as a former House member, I can also tell you that some of the biggest challenges come from disagreements between the Senate and the House. And one of my goals is to help bridge that gap, and instead of butting heads between the chambers, I really want to see collaboration and friendly teamwork when it comes to getting legislation across the finish line. And throughout my campaign, which started in February, time goes by really quick when you're campaigning, from the start of this campaign, the top 3 issues that I've heard about have to do with housing, workforce development, and addressing climate change. And those have become my top 3 priorities. And underlying all of that is also my dedication and concern when it comes to protecting and preserving democracy. Because I believe that without a functioning government, without democracy, we will not be able to address all of these issues that we're going to be spending the next hour and a half talking about. And so my hope is to take all of my knowledge and my experience working in state government back to the State House to continue making good legislation for Windham County. Thank you.
So the next question, submitted by Jean, is about your commitment to this position and longevity in the position, should you be nominated and ultimately elected. Windham County voters have been served by Senator Becca Ballant and Senator Jeanette White for many years in the Senate. Should you be elected, what is your commitment to serving in this role? We'll start with Wendy.
Thank you. We have been served very well by our 2 senators, and they've had a lot of longevity. My commitment is that this would be my full-time job. I would work through the summer as well as the session. That's how I do all my jobs, is there full-time and beyond. So I'm ready to make that commitment.
Nader, you are.
Great. So when I think of commitment in the legislature, my first thought goes to the fact that this is work that goes beyond just January to May. This is work that requires the willingness to take time away from family, work long nights, early mornings, work on the weekends, and work during the off season so that you can actually connect with constituents face-to-face in forums just like this. And when I think of commitment as well, the way I interpreted this question with commitment is that the job also involves being able to draft good policy by collaborating with people who may have different viewpoints than your own. And what I mean by that is having the commitment to realizing that just because somebody might have a different letter next to their name, if they're an independent or a Republican, the commitment is to representing the constituents of this county in Montpelier. And one example that I want to share is at the very beginning of my first year, I worked with an independent legislator, Representative Sibilia from Dover, and we both shared a common view as it related to domestic abuse. And so we both worked on legislation to protect victims of domestic abuse. And for me, it didn't matter what letter was next to her name. What mattered was the fact that we both shared this value and our constituents shared this value. And this law ended up passing out of the House and also being signed by the governor. And moving beyond the collaboration piece, I see this, as Wendy said, this is a full-time job. This is something that requires a lot of dedication, and that's what I plan to give. Thank you.
Hi everyone. I want to recognize that we call our legislature a citizen legislature. But I want to call attention to the fact that we just called this a full-time job. You know how much people get paid for this full-time job? $10K a year with no benefits. So in a place where we don't have housing, where we don't have childcare, when food insecurity is on the rise, I want to call attention and recognize the privilege that the three of us have in being able to have the stability to be able to be part of that citizen legislature. My commitment to the citizen legislature and to our people is to make sure that it becomes a citizen legislature that includes the working class. It means that people who bust their butts to pay that rent, to pay for that child care, that have to go through the bureaucratic barriers of food stamps, that they get an equal say in our policy. That is a citizen legislature. And I want to change the status quo so we can have that be a true citizen legislature. That is my commitment. Thank you.
So the next question was submitted by David, and it relates to LGBTQ+ and reproductive rights. The Supreme Court of the United States has stated high court rulings that establish gay rights and contraceptive rights should be reconsidered. With that being said, why should I support you in your candidacy? Nader, you're up first.
So first and foremost, I think that we need senators who are going to loudly say that we're not going to roll back the clock back to a time when people of the LGBTQ community did not have the same rights, or back to a time when being a member of that community was considered a crime. And we've seen recently that we cannot assume that our rights are guaranteed, and we cannot assume that our bodily autonomy is guaranteed. When I previously served, one of the first priorities of the House was to codify Roe v. Wade into statute, and also begin the process of amending our Constitution to include reproductive liberty. And while we've codified same-sex marriage in this state, I also think that there's opportunity to incorporate that into our Constitution as well. And when it comes to protecting reproductive rights, one of the first steps that I want to take in January is to create safe harbor laws. And safe harbor laws are, these are laws that will protect people who come to Vermont seeking either abortion or reproductive health care or contraceptives. It will protect both that person and the health care provider from prosecution from their home state. And I think that creating those laws and doing that well requires a good and positive working relationship with existing agencies, especially like the Attorney General's office. And I just want to make sure that I answer the question directly, which is why should you support my candidacy? The reason is that I've previously pushed back on large organizations like the NRA or anti-choice organizations, and I think that when it comes to protecting our rights and protecting our liberties, we need legislators who will not back down and who are willing to take a stand when it comes to defending rights. Thank you.
LGBTQ plus rights is personal to me. Not just because I am gay and married, not just because I grew up to gay parents, not just because I have uncles that have died of AIDS, but also because on my campaign trail, I have been questioned of why being gay is so important that should qualify me to be on this campaign. I know what it's like for there to be laws that prohibit you from being you. I know what it's like to always calculate whether you're allowed to even say who you are when you enter a room. LGBTQ plus rights is not just the right of LGBTQ plus, it's the right to exist. And that is everyone's rights. As a senator, I want to make sure that we have the right to be legally bonded with whomever we would like to be legally bonded with, regardless of ethnicity, gender, or sexual orientation. I'd like to make sure that we have the right to engage in private sexual acts. And I think we have the right to have quality health outcomes regardless of ethnicity, gender, and sexual orientation. And we have the right to be able to have a job free of discrimination from our gender or our sexual orientation. This is not a fight of yesterday, this is a fight of today. And I say this trying to remind us that a trans woman, Fern Feather, died this year. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Winche. I also have an uncle who died of AIDS, and first, it is just appalling to me that we even are back at this conversation. It's sad, and it's what's happening through the country with other issues. The state, I just want to go back a few years. It was 4 years ago that the state started its path to amendment. It's going to be Article 22 on the ballot for the Reproductive Rights Amendment. And I'm just so grateful to live in Vermont. I support that amendment, obviously. I would expect that would be obvious, but actually it turns out it's not. So it's important to say that I have support from LGBTQ friends, and I treasure that support. The stories are horrendous, and we can't go back, and we do need to be a place, and we're already preparing to be a place where people can come who want to access abortions. And I'm encouraged by folks I speak with who are willing to be that generous with our space and our money, because it will cost, but it's obviously worth it, and it's important. I think where I can help is, it looks like it's going to get complicated because the battles are going to be fought with ridiculously specific laws on what can be mailed through the mail, because the medication is available for abortion specifically, and so the fight is going to be a very detailed legal fight, and that's something I can particularly help with, because I've been in situations like that where you just need to run through ordinances. But I'm committed. I believe in that LGBTQ and the right to love who you want to love is a basic right. It's not an extra right. It's a basic right, and I'm committed to supporting that. Thank you.
Thank you. And I've got a note that we should try to speak louder into the mic. Fact TV graciously is recording tonight, and we're also, I believe, broadcasting live. So I think it's important for folks to know when we get to the question and answer portion that this is being recorded and will be distributed through Fact TV and other channels, just so you know that this is a public event. So the next question is on behalf of Lydia and Juniper, who are the next generation of Vermonters and citizens of this world, related to climate and the climate crisis we're in. We are in the midst of a heat wave, if you haven't noticed, and a climate crisis. As a senator in Vermont, what can you do to support the goals of the Climate Council in light of the governor's veto against legislation that supports climate goals? And we'll start with Winche.
I'll take off my mask so I can be a little louder. So there's three main things three priorities when it comes to climate change for me. One is to make sure that we subsidize electric transportation and public transportation. We did it when we moved from railroads over to gas cars. We can do it again to move towards electric cars and public transportation. With the caveat that me, myself, living right off of a dirt road, that we also need to recognize that there is mud season and that we can't leave our rural country folks aside. I also have a big passion for protecting our food and water. I work with NOFA in being able to provide climate resilience grant funding to farmers like me. In fact, in the July rains, which was almost as much rain as we got during Hurricane Irene, part of our field actually fell into the creek. And I was not the only farmer in Athens that it affected. Wild Shepherd had to carry lambs, bleeding lambs, across the river to escape from coyotes. Other people's fields just got watered down and lost crops, or their tomatoes molded. This is an issue of today, and we must mitigate it today. And as we see these climate catastrophes, we are going to see more and more climate refugees. We need to have the infrastructure ready to house, ready to feed, ready to integrate people. And this is already happening, okay? I come from Puerto Rico, where in 2016, Hurricane Maria swept Puerto Rico. And after 2 days of no notice, the first notice I got of my dad's well-being was seeing my dad's house on the local news destroyed. My dad was able to get FEMA money to repair it. You know what happened 2 years later? Unprecedented earthquake. There are places in this world where we can no longer go back to, where we can no longer live. And we need to prepare, in Vermont being the place that we're going to be least affected by climate change, we need to prepare to be able to welcome new Vermonters. Thank you.
Thank you. Can everyone hear me? Is this good? Yes, first of all, we need to elect more Democrats so that we can override the veto. What happened with the last veto, we were one vote short, and that was for the clean heat standard. The state has actually is doing a good job addressing climate change. We have very serious goals, and the goals are compatible with the Paris goals. There are two big producers of greenhouse gas. Transportation is the largest one, and then heat from the cost to heat and cool buildings is the second one. And the state's doing a great job on transportation. That's where they started. There are wonderful incentives for buying electric vehicles, to the point where the state incentive plus the federal incentive allow you to buy an electric car about the same price as you would buy a gas car. And then what's great for the person who buys the car is that the operation of that car is much less expensive than a gas car, because using electricity to power the car equates to $1.50 a gallon of gas, paying $1.50 a gallon. So that is a benefit to low-income people as well as higher income people. And the maintenance of those cars is also a lot less expensive. Now, what the state hasn't done as good of a job at is advertising those programs to people and making sure that people know about them. I have a hybrid car, a plug-in hybrid, and the person we bought it from had no idea of these state programs. So it's really important that we publicize those programs more. One thing the state's doing right is it's focusing on when you have a transition, as an example of a car, also when your heating system in your house needs to be replaced. That's where they're focusing their efforts, on the heating side of the equation, and providing, again, huge incentives to go to electric heat. So I think we are on the right track. Totally agree with Winche about climate refugees. I think that's an advantage to us, not a disadvantage, because we need more people to live here, and that's a question for later, so I'll talk about that later. But I think we're on the right track with our climate goals.
Thank you. So I have to say I largely agree with everything that's been said so far. I'm going to touch on it just a little bit more, but I do just want to share a very quick story. My daughter she's 12 years old, and there was this moment about a year ago where she seemed a little bit more quiet than usual, and I wrongly assumed that there was just some preteen drama or something happening. And but what happened later on in the night is she asked me just very bluntly, she said, "Is there anything that we can do about climate change?" And I was really taken aback because I was not expecting that question from my 12-year-old. And there were two conflicting sides to me when I heard this question, and I was trying to figure out how to answer this. There was a part of me that wanted to say, there are government leaders on all different levels who are not doing enough, and we have to do more. But then there was the other side that recognized that I couldn't share a pessimistic message with my daughter. I had to share something that had some semblance of hope in it. And I told her that, yes, there is something that we can do about climate change. Specifically as a 12-year-old, keep asking the hard questions and pay attention to politics and be involved. Just keep being involved. And now, shifting gears a little bit, when it comes to the actual policies, I believe that we have to focus on EV incentives and creating different tiered programs for people who want to purchase EVs, whether they're new or used, because we're starting to see a lot of EVs get recycled back into the market. We also need to focus on building out public transportation, and when doing so, we also need to take into consideration geographic equity. And what I mean by geographic equity is when we're building train stations or bus stops, we have to think about the folks in Wardsboro or Halifax. How will they access these train stations that are in Bellows Falls or Brattleboro? Because folks living out in more rural towns may not be able-bodied and able to bike to these places, or they may not have a friend to give them a ride. And the second part of this also has to do with climate resiliency. We are already seeing climate catastrophes, and we are going to continue seeing climate refugees. I met my first climate refugee, actually, was one of the earliest volunteers in my first campaign who came to Vermont to avoid the fires in California. And we have to be ready by focusing on housing, local food systems, and also protecting our waterways. Recently, I was up in Wardsboro to learn about what it's like to live in Wardsboro. And one of the major concerns when it comes to climate change are the waterways, because that was a town that, similar to Athens, was largely affected by Hurricane Irene, and there were so many houses that basically turned into islands. So we also have to look at building resiliency along our waterways too. Thank you.
Thank you. The next question is from Leslie and relates to healthcare. Currently, 3% of Vermonters don't have health insurance, but 40% are underinsured with high deductibles and copays. This leads to care that might be delayed and result in poor outcomes. As a senator, how do you imagine addressing this issue? We'll start with Wendy.
Thank you. I've supported Medicare for all for years. I mean, we should have had it years ago. We've tried it at the federal level. Vermont is doing what it can. I think it's a PR problem primarily, because I think when we cost everything out, the savings to both the citizens who are covered and the businesses who have employees and the governments who have employees would well outweigh the cost to such a system, because everybody pays for health care or their unhappy place to work. There are some workers, some employers who don't. So I'm very much in favor of Medicare for all, and as close to as we can get to it is important. I think we should look at what other states are doing, because we are a small state. My understanding is we gave up previously because we did have too small of a population. I think we should look at other states. Colorado's really making progress. We may be able to do some work with them, and just support any action that moves us closer, because it's fundamental.
Nader?
Great. So thank you. So first, I just want to share my belief that I don't think that healthcare should be a for-profit industry at all. I think that greed and our country's willingness to monetize just about everything has created the situation that we're in when it comes to healthcare. I think that addressing the rising cost of health insurance and healthcare requires a willingness to collaborate with people who have that expertise. And I'm comfortable in saying that healthcare, that's not in my background. My background is law enforcement and the courts, and tackling something as huge as universal healthcare, which I do support, requires a coalition of legislators. It requires teams of people who know what they're talking about. People like Leslie and people like you who've been working in the healthcare industry, or people who've been advocating for Medicare for all. And I also think that we should, parallel to this topic, I also think that we have to look at how we promote healthy habits in this society. I think that when it comes to things like smoking or eating processed food, we have to look at what type of habits we're engaging in our 20s and 30s and even earlier that is leading to health issues later on in life. And I also recognize, or I also know that large insurance companies have to go through the Green Mountain Cares Board to get insurance rate increases. And it's supposed to be the job of the Green Mountain Cares Board to make sure things are affordable. And I think we all know that it's not affordable right now. So in my opinion, if the Green Mountain Cares Board is not doing its job in keeping things affordable, then the legislature should revise what their role is or take a deep dive into how they're performing their job to keep things affordable. Thank you.
Yeah, so healthcare and healthcare systems, that is my specialty. And I think one of the biggest problems actually having done data work on health and being part of those tables in legislation that talk about health is the fact that we treat health as a commodity. And that means that insurances are able to save money if they deny you care. I want to change that. I think our health is in the public interest, because when we are healthy, we can be more productive. When we are healthy, we can help our neighbors better. And part of this is helping shift from a reactive healthcare to a proactive healthcare. Instead of funding emergency rooms, we need to fund navigators to help people be able to go through housing and get the food stamps, for be able to get the education they need, to be able to get the exercise people need, to be able to fund the arts when we have depression or anxiety, to be able to go actually have just an art class be paid for and you can sit there and paint. That is how some parts of the world actually treat mental health, and I would like to move towards that direction. I also would like to know that Medicare is privatized, right? That's Medicare Advantage, and we're moving, it's sort of moving in that direction. That is a big no-no in my book. And wanting to note that we're trying to move towards a publicly financed system, right? There was just a bill, S285, that I gave testimony on that moved from a fees for service to a global budgeting where we can be able to just try to meet quality outcomes instead of just trying to make money for more procedures. And as we try to move to this, it is important to remember that OneCare just won a court battle to not show their books to the state auditor. That needs to change. If we want healthcare to work for us, we need to stop focusing on denying people health, and we need to start focusing on promoting people's health. Thank you.
Thank you. So in order to get to audience questions, this will be the last submitted question. And we'll be talking about childcare. There was a question submitted by Julia about childcare, especially related to essential workers and early childhood educators and care providers. Julie asks, a strong and stable childcare system is essential to meeting the needs of Vermont's children, families, businesses, and economy. How do you plan to solve Vermont's childcare crisis in 2023 or beyond? So we'll start with Nader.
So, as a young father, I can personally attest and agree to the fact that childcare is essential. I remember when I first moved here, and I was starting off as a trooper, and I had a 3-year-old daughter, and trying to find childcare back in 2011 was a challenge. I can't imagine how hard it is right now. I know that last session, the legislature provided an increase of $4.9 million to the Childcare Financial Assistance Program to help families be able to afford childcare. I think that we need to continue that trend and make sure that we're providing families who need support the grants and funds to be able to afford childcare. But then this goes to the next question, which is the fact that we need to develop more of a workforce when it comes to to organizations that provide childcare. Recently, I went to the neighborhood school in Brattleboro, which is a childcare provider in that area, and I took a tour with the early childhood care program director. And I asked the question a lot of different ways, and it all came back to money. People who work in this field need more money. That's what it comes down to. They also need health insurance. And people who enter both the education field as teachers in the K-12 system, or people who become childcare providers, they're not doing that job to get rich. They're doing it because they care about children. But I also think that people who do those jobs, they should be able to afford their groceries. They should be able to afford their rent. And they should not live in fear that they're going to be evicted because they can't afford rent, or have to leave a job that they love just so that they can make a livable wage. So those are my thoughts on providing childcare, and it's over the course of this campaign, I've learned that that's one of the biggest priorities in this county, and I'm going to continue focusing on it. Thank you.
I'm not going to say we have a childcare problem here. What I'm going to say we have a childcare crisis. 80% of the children in our county that need childcare don't have it. When we see who most exited the workforce during the pandemic due to lack of childcare, it was mothers. When my sister tried to move to Vermont and pandemic started, not explicitly, of course, it happens implicitly, but she got fired because she didn't have childcare. Because when you're trying to take insurance calls and there's a screaming child in the background, your boss is going to say that is not appropriate. We have a childcare crisis, and we need to solve it. And I am ready, right after the primaries, to have a roundtable with Let's Grow Kids, with Building Better Futures, to be able to talk what it means to integrate our childcare services into the public education system. No one should have to pay for childcare. And I believe by integrating it into the public school systems, we can consolidate what it actually means to provide childcare, because right now it's divided into different departments. We can talk about what it means to be able to help childcare workers be able to have student loan forgiveness, just like teachers. And we need to recognize that just because we have childcare service, that is not the only service we can provide for children. We need to be able to empower families to be able to bond with their children. We need adequate family leave. So those are the three types of policies that I would want to push to address the childcare crisis. Thank you.
Thank you. The evidence is clear that the first 5 years of a child's life are the most important years, and that's when the brain development happens. It's also critical time for the family itself and the bonding of the family. I was fortunate to be able to stay home and privileged for my children's early years, and I want everyone to have that choice and that opportunity. So I also support expanded family leave. And that's something that will help all of us as Vermonters, not just the family. I've looked at Let's Grow Kids. Their advocacy is wonderful. And for the state needs to start spending earlier than kindergarten to have an effective child care program. The state now has a policy that families should not have to spend more than 10% on child care, which is still a fair amount. But many families spend more than 30% on child care. So it is a crisis. And if we want to get young people to move to this state, we need to find a way to solve that crisis. The state is moving forward, but we need to do more, and I will be there to help. Thank you.
So now we'll be moving into the audience participation portion of our evening. And we'll keep answers brief, 2 minutes, around 2 minutes. And you can ask a question verbally. Just raise your hand when we're ready to start that. If you could, I would appreciate you keeping your questions in the form of a question and keeping it brief so that we can get through as many questions as possible. Again, a reminder that this is being recorded. It is a public event. And we prefer questions for all the candidates to answer. If there are questions that you have individually for candidates, we will have time at the end for individual conversations, if possible. So, is there a question from the audience? Gentleman there I saw. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity to speak, and thank you all three of you for showing up.
Stand up and.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, just speak loud.
Sure.
Yeah, and I'll also, I'll be summarizing your question for the audio, so correct me if I get it wrong.
All right. My name is Bill Morse, by the way. I'm on the Rockingham School Board, and recently, I say 2 months ago, the discussion of child care came up, whether or not we would be able to expand it. There was even talk of financing, in part, a facility for child care here in Bellows Falls. As you know, 66 Atkinson, where the church once stood, was seen as a possible site for a child care facility. The long and short of it is, we have just enough money to pay for staff K through 12. We are getting some enrollment increases. We are having to hire a few more teachers. We are lucky that we can staff schools at all because of the pressures and the working conditions that have evolved over the last 2 years. It's not an easy transition to go from college as a new teacher into a classroom where students lack discipline, they lack schedule, they're going from a free-for-all into a structured environment, and we're lucky we can keep teachers. My point is, a lot of great ideas here. I support child care as well. I think the first 3 years are critical, especially if the household is not stable or it's a single adult that's trying to raise a couple of children. How are we going to pay for, we talked about new housing, we talked about subsidies for electric vehicles, other sources of energy for heating our homes, and that's going to be an issue this fall, this winter. Where's the money going to come from unless we tax the hell out of the people that are now paying the bills? We can't go any further in debt. So my question to you is, and the child care is an important example where it does need attention. All right, we need to do as much as we can to strengthen families so that there are two adults raising children and not one struggling single parent. So that's my question. It's for all three of you. Where is the money going to come from? How would you prioritize where that money is unless you're going to have a tax revolt?
I think to summarize your question for the audio, we know that child care is important and there are other priorities in the state. How are we going to find the funding to fund this priority?
Can I answer for
Yes. It's
we're
Winche's turn
going
to
there.
go.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
I wasn't sure if we were sticking.
Yeah.
Yeah, so this seems to me like a two-part question. Thanks, Bill, for asking that question. First, on the child care, I think something to note is that a lot of our child care money is actually in the Agency of Human Services right now, and it's not in the Agency of Education. So when we are able to integrate child care into the public education system, we'll be able to move money from AHS over to AOE to be able to put that in to add to our budgets. And then the second question of, recognizing that we have a lot of great ideas, but we're a poor state. And we need more tax revenue. And I am 100% in agreement that we cannot tax our working class more. That cannot happen. And where I want to try to push is how can we increase tax revenues from other sources. We had a large influx of people moving in for COVID and buying houses, and I'm saying this in Athens, for $500,000 in Athens, one of the top 5 poorest towns in the state. We have an opportunity to be able to tax second homes in a way we haven't been able to before. And it can not only bring new tax revenue, it can also possibly vacate new homes for you to be able to house the people that already live here. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Good question. Devil's always in the details. Some of the things we've been talking about, the additional housing funds and the additional EV funding, that's from ARPA funding, that's from one-time federal money, so that's not a recurring expense. Education, as you know, is currently funded by property taxes. The state's looking at funding education through income tax. With our new incoming folks having higher incomes, that could be a very good source and take the pressure off of the property tax. There are other revenues. One thing I want to do is allow towns to do more than they can now. Right now, towns are very restricted in income sources that they have. Not every town can even do a local option tax, which by its very nature, local option means the people want to be taxed. I want to extend that so that towns could have other revenue that they could help the schools with. So there are some things we can do. And the additional, Winche's right about the additional property values. There are limits on how, in our current system, on what you can pay in property taxes. So that those limits would be something to address. So a combination of understanding that the ARPA money that we received is funding many of these things that we talked about, and then income tax money, and then additional wealth that's being, actually, one other thing is economic development. The whole point of economic development is to have new businesses and increase the value of those businesses. I'm the chair of the SEVEDS board, Southeast Vermont Economic Development Strategies, and economic development is happening here. That was one of the later questions that we didn't get to, but Bellows Falls is doing just exactly what it should be doing. to increase values. The train station, I applaud the select board for purchasing the train station. That will help trains. I'm a big advocate for trains. Next week, the Ethan Allen service, the Amtrak service, starts on the west side of the state. The service that is the next prioritized is the second Vermonter service on this side of the state, which will be the Montrealer, will return to the Montrealer. So those, that level of service will bring people here. And then we'll need to find ways to protect the value so that existing residents aren't taxed out of their homes. So we need to be forward thinking about how we can protect existing residents from having their value go too high. So that'll be a nice problem to have. That's where I see that problem.
Alrighty, so I agree with a lot of what's already been said, and I don't want to belabor the point. But one thing that I'll add is that when we look at the budget projections, the Joint Fiscal Office creates these projections. Over the last year, our state has been exceeding those projections. And so things may feel and look negative in a lot of different areas in the world right now, but when it comes to the state of Vermont budget, things are in a healthy place right now. And you know what I would suggest is that that I certainly don't want to raise taxes on the working class who live in this area. But as has already been mentioned, the second homeowners who own homes in this area, the taxes are substantially lower than people who live here full time. So I do think that's one area that we should look at.
In the front row here.
Hi everybody, my name is Wendy Harrison and I live in Bellows Falls. This question is for all three candidates. Of all the ways the state collects revenue through taxation, income, sales, property, etc., what form of taxation do you think is the most equitable and why?
Wendy, when you're ready.
Okay. That's a good question. I'm gonna have to think while I talk.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No.
Would you be willing to speak that into the mic?
Sure. Yeah, should just kind of
For the
lean down?
audio? Yeah.
Okay. My name is Wendy Levy. I'm from Bellows Falls. Of all of the ways the state collects revenue through taxation, including income, sales, property, etc., what form of taxation do you think is the most equitable and why? And this question is for all of the candidates.
I think there was some difficulty back here, so if I can summarize. What is the most equitable form of taxation and why?
Okay, thank you. Good question. And the answer is it depends on what you're funding with the taxes. So property taxes are typically what municipalities use. And one of the reasons for that is because you're not going to move your home or your business. And the things that are funded by that tax are services to that property, generally, like police services, that kind of thing, general services. So in Vermont, property taxes are regulated and they're capped based on income, which is very interesting to me because that's not in all the other states where I've been. But you don't even have to apply for it. If you have a certain income, the state automatically reduces your property tax. So I think that's terrific. That's fair. It's easy. People don't have to fill out any form. Some people don't even know that they get it. But the necessary revenue to the town to supply those services is there. So income taxes are not in every state. Some states are proud not to have income taxes and they think that that will help people move to their states. Sometimes it does, but sometimes when people get to those states, they realize the level of service isn't what it was. Like for example, when we moved here, our auto insurance went down, it was a 1/12 of what it was, what we paid in Florida. So that more than offset the property taxes we were paying. But it just gets really complicated to make those assumptions. So everybody just looks at the taxes instead of the others. So income tax is intended to be progressive, so that folks who are making higher incomes pay a higher percentage of their income, not just at the same level, because they can, and that's what keeps our society going, because we all benefit when we have schools and services that are provided statewide. So generally income taxes are provided at the state level because they benefit everybody. Even if you don't have kids in school, you're still benefited because a democracy requires an educated population, right? So we're all better off when kids are educated. So that's why the income tax goes to schools. So then sales tax. Sales tax is one that is seen as, there's more flexibility to it. Some things you buy, you have to buy. The things you have to buy are often not taxed, like food isn't taxed. But the local,
we need to.
oh, move it up, sorry, getting in the weeds. The local option sales tax allows you to tax things that people who are visitors purchase, which is why it's valuable to communities. So I think that's more fair also.
Clearly a very
Sorry.
interesting and great question that we could go more into. Nader, go ahead.
So, to answer the question, what is the most equitable type of tax? I think that a progressive income tax is the most equitable type of tax. I think that if you're making millions of dollars, then I think that the proportion to which you are paying into the tax system should be higher. If you're living in poverty, I think that the taxes that you pay should be very, very minimal, if not non-existent. And the reason that I say that is because when people are able to have more money in their pockets to pay for basic essential goods, the economy thrives more and people live more happy lives. And this is also how we reduce crime. A lot of people ask me, because of my background, they say, what's your stance on crime? And it's all linked to poverty. And so I think that when people have more money in their pockets, they're able to save, and they're also able to spend in the local economy. It reduces crime, it's good for the economy, and we're also generating more taxes from folks who are making millions of dollars. So that's my thought on it. Thank you.
Yeah, so I think one of the important things that I bring to this, to being able to be a senator is humility and understanding when I'm not quite the expert, and I'm not quite the expert on the different tax rates. However, I can speak from what I know, and I am an equity expert. And what I do know is that when we talk about percentages, it is very unique to a situation. And when we talk about taxes funding services, it's also going to be unique. For example, when we talk about Social Security tax, yes, we are paying for the Social Security income. And people who are earning Social Security income, some folks are only having $800 a month. You can't pay for housing. You can't pay for rent, right? You can't pay for food on that. Then you have this blind homeless, the homeless population that's blind to our knowledge, right? Because they're on Social Security income, right? No, so I believe in being able to actually look and having an impact analysis and actually working with, for example, the Office of Racial Equity, which actually published an impact analysis to ethically analyze our policies, to be able to identify, is the net benefit actually working for our people? And how do we change the status quo to make sure that we're not leaving people behind? Thank you.
I'll call the woman back here in the picture. Yes.
Artu, Westminster. You've all been talking about one of the ways of addressing climate problems being encouraging electric vehicles. I'm curious what percentage of the electricity in Vermont is actually produced sustainably. And if it's not 100%, can encouraging electric vehicles really address climate problems?
Okay, so I think to summarize, if I get it right, what percentage of electric cars in Vermont use,
No, what percentage of electric power
Of
overall in Vermont is produced sustainably?
what percentage of electricity in Vermont is produced sustainably?
Yep.
And how can electronic vehicles support a significant reduction? Or
If you don't have 100% sustainable electricity, encouraging electric vehicles may not be getting you anywhere.
so the question
You're just
is,
running
what
out of
can we,
coal.
what additional can we do to increase our use of sustainably produced electricity in addition to electronic vehicles?
No,
I
You
think
got somewhere. Oh,
I
that's
think
for
they
your
are.
help.
Yeah, I think the question is if the electricity itself isn't produced sustainably,
How
then
can
what's
electric
the
vehicles-
point
That's
of-
exactly it. Yep.
of doing it?
Okay, thank you. I'm a little sweaty and hot here. I don't know about you.
Yeah, no,
Okay, I think we'll start with Wendy.
it's a great,
Did we start with you on the last question?
I think so, okay.
So is it me? Okay. So this was a conversation I actually had with someone very recently who's a retired engineer, and my understanding is that we are very close, actually, to 100% renewable energy. My understanding was that what he said was that we have about 60% of our energy produced from water, hydro, yes, sorry. Words escape you when you're up here sometimes. But so we have 60% produced that way, and then 40% produced from nuclear energy outside of the state. Some people don't consider nuclear energy to be renewable, but it is cleaner. I would agree. It is cleaner than oil. It's definitely cleaner than coal. So my understanding is that the vast majority, almost 100% of our energy is produced through renewable means. So, yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I think a point that Nader was touching on that I kind of want to just point out is that sustainable is a matter of opinion. And what we can say is that electric companies that are co-ops in Vermont, to my understanding, always welcome for feedback, is that co-op electric companies are all actually 100% off fossil fuel, and then GMP is supposed to be off fossil fuel fairly soon. I don't know if it was 2025, 2030, the year escapes me. And as we move towards electric cars, something that I want to note that is not sustainable is our lithium batteries. Lithium is not sustainable. It is mined, it produces greenhouse gases, and we are going into other countries like Bolivia, overthrowing their government to try to get lithium. So this is a much bigger problem than just going to electric. Sustainable needs to have a long-term solution that we don't have right now. We have a Band-Aid solution, and it is what we need to do right now. I think our policy needs to look forward, and we need to think about ways that we can source sustainable ways to capture energy. Thank you.
Good points, both of you. Yes, my understanding is that we are just about at sustainable production completely. And the climate action plan, which is on the state's website, can give you more information. And to Winche's point about the lithium, yes, that is a problem. And what we really need to do is have fewer cars, not just electric cars. We need walkable, bikeable communities. We need to use public transit. That's another aspect of Bellows Falls that's really good, and Bellows Falls needs to capitalize on that. We need to do car sharing. We won't be able to get rid of cars completely. I mean, I understand that, but I've been involved in public transit for a while, and there are things, public transit can be improved with just tweaking. Right now the routes don't run long enough in the evening for folks to get home, but they run in the morning early enough. So if we just extend the routes, we can get a double benefit. we need things like shelters, which don't cost that much, but they really help people ride public transportation. Electric bikes help a lot. Again, we have a battery issue, but batteries have been an issue for a long time. We are working on it. People are making progress on that. But electric bicycles help too. It's much less of an impact than a car, and it also improves your health. There are significant health benefits to public transit. Also, it gets you to school, it gets you to jobs. There's a lot of job training that we need done for workforce development, and employers just need workers. And a large reason for lack of workforce is that folks can't get to work. That's happening all over. Good question.
Okay, so it's now almost 7:45, and we want to end with all the candidates to tell us something that you want to leave us with. And are there any questions that you didn't get to answer that you would like to answer? Also, you may include in your closing statements how we can reach you and get in touch with you if audience members would like more information or to get involved with your campaigns. So we'll start with you.
Thank you again, everyone, for joining us on what is the unceded Abenaki territory. I want you to know that I feel like I'm sort of the product of the American dream. I went from poverty, right, from Section 8 to food stamps, through college mentorships, to be part of the middle class. And that type of economic mobility is the kind of mobility we need to foster for our folks. And right now what we have in the middle class is a benefits cliff, where we make too much money to be able to apply for programs, but not enough to be able to weatherize our homes. And what I love about democracy here in the United States, in the mainland, is that we can have a conversation and maybe disagree a little bit, and I won't get jailed. That's nice. So I actually want to push a little bit against something that Wendy said, talking about we need to elect more Democrats. Something that I want us to know is that the biggest enemy to progress is not those who directly oppose it, but those who stand implicitly in front of it, right, and making those barriers. When we talked about, right, when we had the decriminalization of marijuana, you know who was a champion of that bill? Republican Benning. When I approached a Democratic legislature, and I have family that have criminal records from drug dealing, because that is the only way to make money when you are poor in Puerto Rico. And when I asked, I would love to bring some families here, expunge their records, like get them a new life, get a job, right, have the peer support network. What kind of mechanisms are we having to take down this $1 million barrier that exists into entering into the new cannabis industry? I got told by that Democratic legislature, well, we're more focused on people in Vermont who's been affected by cannabis. Hippies like me. Oh yes. So I want us to think outside the bubble. We don't just need to elect Democrats, we need to elect people who have experienced the hardships, who are ready to face the hardships right alongside with you. And I have a question that has not been asked in any of the forums, and it's how we're going to solve our substance use disorder. Because when working on Racial Disparities Advisory Panel, the biggest reason why people are imprisoned is because of substance use. And what happens when you have a criminal record is that you can't get a job, you can't get a house, you can't provide for your community. You lose your peer support network. Where are you left? How can you integrate into the society? We need to move away from an incarceration program to a public health program. And that for me is decriminalizing drug use. And I would invite the other candidates for all of us to hear what their stance is on that is. Thank you.
Wendy?
Sure.
you're up next.
Well, thank you for the question. I'll answer that and then I'll talk more generally. I am concerned, and I've heard a lot from folks about the opioid situation. People are not getting the treatment that we promised them. It's a serious, serious problem, and the state needs to fulfill that commitment and that promise to provide the services. We've actually closed sites, and again, it's funding, it's lack of staff, but that's not an excuse. People's lives, people's families' lives are being lost because of this. And actually, relative to both of your issues with the Democrats, also, Burlington, the city of Burlington, wanted to decriminalize or have open use sites. And the governor wouldn't let that happen. So I think we should at least start there. And I'm happy to consider, I would consider definitely decriminalizing because it has worked in other places, but I think we should study it first, learn more about it, because it's taking us over. It's the opioid crisis in particular, but then there are other drugs that are coming also, or that have started to be more prevalent. We need to get a handle on that, and I have heard that from many, many people that I've spoken with. So back to what I was going to talk about. We have existential, I mean the definition of existential problems, problems that could cause us not to exist as a society. I mean, between climate change and democracy, I'm really, really worried about our country and democracy. And those are big problems. It could be that this will get people to vote. We've had a very low amount of folks who regularly vote in elections in this country. It takes a lot to get people to the polls. And even though one party is making it worse for that, we need to show up. So even if you don't vote for me, just vote. We've got to appreciate the value of our vote. And I think that appreciation is coming. I choose to be optimistic and look at the potential that we have. Our children, our kids, our young people are getting motivated. Older people are getting motivated. I think we're all getting motivated because we've seen just how scary things can be. So I think this could be an amazing time for us these next few years, but we all need to participate. We've got to participate. So that's the message that I want to leave you with, and that's the message that I promote. I want people to be involved in government. Government is for the people, and it hasn't been for the people as much as it needed to be, and we may finally have come to the point where the people demand that it be what it should be. Thank you.
Okay, same question, additional question to you, Nader, and what would you like to leave us with?
Thank you. So, trailing off of what Wendy just talked about, actually, we talked about a lot of different important issues today, a lot of issues with tons of nuance. But the underlying issue, for me, has to do with protecting and preserving democracy. And I just want to share a quick story about that. On the day that I was sworn in as a state representative, I had a lot of family coming up to visit. And it's typically a family affair. Everybody comes up. And my family on my mother's side is originally from Iran. They came here in the 80s to avoid political persecution. And so my grandmother, she was crying. And they weren't tears of joy because she was thinking back to how she used to hide in her basement to avoid political persecution. And in her lifetime, she's now watching her grandson gets sworn into a functioning democracy. And every time I think of January 6th, I think of my grandmother. So, sorry, I get a little teary-eyed sharing that story, but that's why protecting democracy is so important to me. Because if we don't have a functioning government, if we don't have a democracy, we're not going to be able to address all of these issues that we've been talking about. Now, to the question of decriminalization, this is something that I actually worked on back in the Judiciary Committee. And at first, coming from my background, when I heard of this idea of decriminalizing, my first thought is that sounds like a wild idea. It does not sound like a good idea either. But when you look at the evidence, when you look at what's happened in Portugal with overdoses plummeting after decriminalization, the evidence shows that decriminalization works. And I worked on legislation to support decriminalization, and even though that legislation was very incremental, it still got, you should have seen the sales. It was full of cops coming to protest against it, despite the fact that evidence shows to the contrary that decriminalization works. So what I want to leave you with, and just to be clear, I support decriminalization. What I want to leave you with is that I've previously supported raising the minimum wage, I've supported paid family leave, I've supported protecting access to reproductive health care and abortion, and these are the things that I want to continue working on if I'm able to be elected as your senator. So thank you all.
Well, that concludes the question and forum for tonight, and I want to appreciate all three candidates for their preparation and their putting themselves out there as candidates, and for your thoughtful responses. So I think we should give them a round of applause.
I'm the chair of the Westminster Town Democratic Committee, among other things. And we were one of the three committees that sponsored the gathering this evening. So I'd like to thank all of you who participated. I'd like to thank all of you who helped bring snacks. I'd like to thank the candidates for joining us today. And please, as a reminder, do your homework. These three people are running. Two of them are going to win in the primary. The primary is happening on August 9th. You can get your ballot and vote tomorrow if you wanted to, or you can vote any day between now and August 9th. In the general election, we've all got competitors. Two of these candidates will be in the Senate. There will also be senators that are running from the Republican Party and independents. So think about what you've heard, think about what you care about, do your homework, and please go out and vote. Vote in the primary, and please also vote in the general. We've got some really big things at stake. People were talking about Proposition 5. It's going to the voters in the general election. You get to determine, are we going to have reproductive choice amended so that that is guaranteed in our Constitution? We'll be the first place in the United States to have that guaranteed in our Constitution. So a lot of important things are coming up. Please take some time. I believe all the candidates are going to be here for a little bit. You're welcome to come up and chat with them. People have material on the back table. We have seltzer, we have snacks. Grab some food and bring it home with you. And if you'd like to find out more, please, follow up. We'd be happy to follow up with you. And thank you to all of you for coming. When Leslie and Laura and I got here today, we saw all these chairs set up by Fact TV and by the library. Thank you for your help again. And we thought, oh gosh, there's too many chairs. We're never going to fill those all up. And look at you showing up. So thank you for the challenge.